In July of this year, we were under contract for a $1.3 million listing, and we went through the entire inspection process, but rather than negotiate with the seller over that inspection, our client decided to terminate. And the reasons they terminated had not just to do with the issues that came up on inspection, but their perception of whether the seller would be negotiable or not in addressing their concerns. And they decided to not even give the seller an opportunity based on a negotiation over commissions. And with that, we'd like to welcome you to House Einstein Podcast 58. I'm your host, Osman Parvez. I'm the founding broker of House Einstein. As you'll find out, we're a brokerage based here in Boulder, Colorado. We're going to talk about real estate in this podcast, as we have many times, with the intention to help you make a smarter real estate decision. But keep in mind, this podcast is entertainment, and if you are making decisions on your real estate needs or your financial needs or your spiritual needs, please consult with your professional advisor. If you are a client of House Einstein, pick up the phone or send an email to your broker within our brokerage, your agent here at House Einstein. We are more than happy to help you, but don't rely on this podcast for professional advice. And that disclaimer keeps our attorneys happy. And with me is Hamish Crabb.
Hello. Osman, you didn't do your intro first, so I'll see if I can set the tone here. I'm Hamish, member of the team and kind of the grease for the wheels, so to speak. Help keep things running smoothly and assist agents with contracts, showings, pretty much anything to help lighten their load, and also get some of the marketing out on our socials. It's good to be here on the pod.
Thank you, Hamish. And if you are interested in learning more about what we do, visit us at houseeinstein.com. But let's go through our topics du jour. Today we're going to be talking about negotiations over commissions and what really is happening behind the scenes today in real estate, what buyers and sellers likely don't know is occurring. And we're also going to talk a little bit about the importance of story in marketing and how that is being conveyed today, not just in photography, but in video, and how you as a seller should be thinking about positioning your property if you're thinking about listing it. And also, if you're a buyer, how you should be looking at online marketing before you schedule a showing with an agent. We're going to talk about market conditions today, as we often do. We're going to talk about how this market's breaking out into a tale of not two markets, but three. And there's a whole bunch of other news that we're going to touch base on in a later segment called In the News. And as always, we talk a little bit about some properties that we are working on, listings we might be working on, or buyers we are seeking to help. We cover several sales of the week. And then to keep you deeply entertained, which is, of course, the intent of this podcast, it is entertainment, we're going to do a little Carveout. We've been doing this the last few podcasts, just touching base on stuff that may not have anything to do with real estate, but stuff that Hamish and I are, hobbying.
Yeah.
What's top of mind? What else are we working on besides our real estate life? What else is going on in our world? And that
proves we're human.
Topics. Well, it certainly makes us a little more human. That's right.
Yeah.
We are humans, and perhaps you're interested in this. As always, we welcome your feedback. So please leave messages for us. Send us an email. We're always happy to hear from you. And if we have time, we will certainly do our best to respond.
Absolutely.
This podcast is sponsored by House Einstein. We serve buyers and sellers in Colorado, focusing on Boulder, Denver, and several mountain resort towns, including Breckenridge and Winter Park. Our mission is simple: help you make a smarter real estate decision. You can learn more at houseeinstein.com or our YouTube channel, where you'll find videos on neighborhoods, specific listings, and much, much more.
Well, first subject of the day is Tell Me Something I Don't Know, the topic du jour, and the subject of the introduction, which is commissions. The NAR settlement put them top of mind, I think, for pretty much all buyers and sellers. And whether or not it's to their detriment, it's certainly being used in negotiation now. We have some personal experience with it, and we've heard a little bit of anecdotal experience over this as well. Oz, what's your thoughts here?
Well, we're not going to recap the entire settlement because that is nuanced,
Yeah.
and you will find content around that all over the internet. But what you won't find is what's really happening right now behind the scenes. And agents are now required to have a written agreement with their buyer before scheduling showings, and that written agreement has to specify how much they're getting paid and who is paying. And of course, in Colorado, that's existed for a long time. But the biggest change, other than the written agreement that's required, is that agents are having conversations much earlier with their potential buyers around this compensation for showing homes. But it's been a very long time, maybe never, that agents have been forced to justify their value, particularly buyer's agents. Listing agents have done that for a very, very long time, but the buyer's agents like the idea, and for many, 2 decades, just, sure, I'm happy to show you a house. No problem. And you start seeing houses, and you may not even known that your agent was being paid here locally anywhere from 2.5 to 3%. And you saw it on the settlement statement, but at that point, it just looked like the seller paid for the services, and you didn't really have a chance to negotiate it or consider it. Although, really, if you weren't buying the house, the services wouldn't have been paid for. So the funding source is you as a buyer, but the opportunity to talk about those services and negotiate with a real estate agent was effectively non-existent. And so a lot of agents that didn't have much to offer, frankly, other than the ability to open doors and talk about real estate, be pleasant to interact with, and pass the real estate exams, that's, they were collecting oversized commissions. And that really was one of the founding causes for House Einstein. How did we end up here? We ended up here as a brokerage because of the opportunity to offer much, much higher levels of services. So what is really happening right now is that most real estate agents are complying with the rules, and they are setting the commission, and most listing agents are sending out notices to the buy side for what the commissions are. And in practice, it lines up pretty well. Most agents are charging 2.5 to 2.8 here locally. I understand, well, I know for a fact that in places like Breckenridge in the mountains, it's much closer to 3%. In Denver, it's typically 2.5. In Fort Collins, it's much more commonly 3%. So there is regional variation. And you only know that because, well, we only know that because we work in these markets. Previously, you were able to actually see the buy-side compensation on the MLS. That's been removed. And that has created an interesting vacuum in the market. It's created a vacuum for disreputable agents to charge more. It's also created a vacuum for a secondary negotiation to occur over commissions. So let me walk you through what happened in this deal in Longmont that we shared with you in the intro. So our client terminated on this property, and the reason they terminated was that our negotiated commission for this client was 2.8%, and the listing agent initially had only offered 2.2%, not 2.8, so they were below market. They weren't even 2.5. And we wrote into the contract that the seller to pay 2.8 because that's what we charge for the services we offer. And I'll walk through a quick recap of those services in a moment, but our rate is 2.8. And they said we only pay 2.2, and we ended up negotiating to 2.5. And our client agreed to pay the difference between 2.5 and 2.8, which is a few $1,000s on the purchase price of $1.3 million.
Yeah.
But it left a really bad taste in their mouth. And they had already previously agreed to pay our commission in our buyer agency agreement. So there's no doubt we were going to get paid. But that renegotiation over what their agent is getting paid was a distraction, and also set a very bad tone for the rest of the transaction. Because instead of negotiating over the purchase of the home in that contract, they're negotiating not just on purchase price and dates and other contract terms, but they're also negotiating on how much their agent that they've already agreed to pay is getting paid by the sell side. And it has very little to do with the services offered. It has very little to do with the amount of time invested by an agent. And it's just a disconnect, because from the buyer's perspective, they're focusing on this house they'd like to buy. And now a tone is being set for, frankly, a very small sum of money over compensation to the agent, which is really, it's a distraction, right?
Yeah.
And it also...
It's a nickel and dime type of feeling too, right?
Well, so here's what happened. The inspection turned up a bunch of things wrong with the house. And we did go under contract. So we went under contract actually slightly above the list price in order to lock this thing down. It was fresh on the market. We wanted to wipe out the competition. So we wrote a really strong offer. And there were a number of what looked like mostly minor issues that came up. And the biggest one was the siding looked a little sketchy. It was original siding on a historic house. And it had been painted over many times. And at some point in its history, instead of actually replacing boards that showed sign of deterioration, an owner actually painted. Like, they scraped the paint and painted over it again, but they didn't fill it, right? So we just had our house painted up here in the mountains, and the painters used a product, they called it Bondo, so you get the idea, right? It basically attaches to in our house, it's cement fiber board, and fills in holes. Like, there was an actual piece missing. I found them. Another piece, they put that on, almost like doing body work on a car. Smoothed it over. You can't even see it. It looks perfect. These guys were pros. And this particular house in Longmont did not look perfect. Clearly, there were sections of wood paneling, wood siding that should have been replaced or repaired before they were painted. And in my estimate, it might have been a $25,000 worst case scenario, right? Like, it wasn't the whole house. There were clear sections, particularly around the chimney. And what I anticipated happening was we would issue an inspection objection for that issue along with several others, the total of which, with the siding and the other issues, might have been $30,000, right?
Right.
Maximum cost to fix.
And that's not like, it's a negotiation, so it's not necessarily like that's the hard number either, right?
Right. Well, or we would have gone through estimates, right? Like, look, we need to extend the time period between the inspection objection and the inspection resolution, rather than 2 days, which is typically what you see in these types of contracts. We could make it a week or 10 days. Let's amend the contract so we can get actual estimates and see what this is really going to cost to address. And instead of any of that, they decided that after that renegotiation over 0.3%, the seller was obviously a cheapskate, and there was no way they were going to be open to any discussion over inspection issues. They were very unpleasant in that negotiation over commissions, which there shouldn't have been a negotiation anyway. And so they decided, you know what, we're out. We don't think this seller is a reasonable human being, and we want to deal with them. And so we terminated on inspection without giving the seller an opportunity to actually address our inspection objections. And the buyers had been serious. They spent over $1,000 on due diligence. Like, so inspections of various kinds, estimates of various kinds, and then they just decided it wasn't worth it because of the attitude of the seller.
Yeah.
And so the seller said,
right?
fine, take a hike, no problem. They called us a week later, by the way, and they said, hey, is there any way we can fix these issues? And we said, no, it's too late. We're out. So the property was back on the market, and for the next 6 weeks, they kept it at 1.3, and nothing happened. And then in the middle of September, they dropped it to 1.2. So they dropped it $100,000 from that original list price. It took them, original July contract, end of July, a month and a half to realize they're not going to get their 1.3. And this is not atypical. So once a property goes under contract, if it bounces back out of contract, there's a really good chance that buyers are going to perceive that as something wrong with the house and that the market's not there for this house. And so you're very unlikely to see a contract a second time around at the list price, especially after a month. And it's still sitting at $1.2 million. The property is still available. It has not gone back under contract.
Ouch.
And it's unfortunate, right? Like if you think about, I don't know if the seller ever realized what happened. I don't know if that was communicated. I did my best to coach their agent when we had this negotiation over 2.5 or 2.8. They said we'll pay 2.5. I said okay. Well, I'm not discounting the services we're offering. We've been working with these people for months.
Yeah.
We've done many remote videos for them. We've done our work. We're helping them with due diligence. We're obviously helping them with comps and negotiation. We're giving them our entire contractor list. Like we're doing a lot of work for these people and ensuring delivery of our services. We're not discounting. Sorry, they've agreed to pay 2.8. So you're going to force me to go to the buy side, my client, and ask for 0.3. And that's going to, I warned her, this is going to set a bad tone. And indeed and I didn't say anything to our client about that, being a difficult thing. And it still set a really bad tone.
They came to us. They were saying, I can't believe, you are bringing them the deal and they don't want to pay you fairly. Like that just leaves a bad taste in our mouths. I'm paraphrasing, but that was the essential gist from our clients, was that they had no problem paying us because they saw the value and understood it, but it just set a bad tone for them, being somewhat nickel and dimed for this and not really feeling like there was going to be room for further conversation, come inspection.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is what's really happening behind the scenes, is that the smarter agents are broadcasting the buy-side commissions in advance to showing agents. So there's no confusion over the commissions that are being offered. And other agents are waiting to receive the offer to see what commission's being asked for. And if you receive an offer for a commission that's outside the norm, I think it's totally fair to push back. But if it's within that norm for the region for the last 20 years, I would not push back on it, because you introduce a secondary negotiation between the buyer and their agent over compensation that's already been decided, and all you're doing for typically a very small amount of money is setting a really bad tone to the rest of the transaction. And going under contract is just stage one. Staying under contract, resolving inspection issues, and actually getting to closing are multiple levels. You have to get through appraisal too. There are multiple steps that you have to go through. The deal isn't done until everyone's at the closing table and signed off on. Like even at the closing table, it could blow up on you. So, so you don't want to introduce anything that creates a distrust between buyer or seller, or between their agent and the principal, either side of the transaction. But what you do want to do is have conversations, and this is just a quick recap. Have conversations with prospective agents before you choose who you're working with about the services that they are offering, to make sure that you're getting as much value as possible for the commissions that you are paying. Whether you are on the buy side or the sell side, this is not that challenging of a conversation. If your agent acts like they're offended, or they act like you should just know that we're worth this amount of money, choose a better agent. And I'll walk you through really quickly what we offer, just so you have a sense of something to compare it to. We do remote videography with gimbaled cameras, and typically have those videos uploaded within 24 hours. We actually tell our clients 48 hours. This is for remote, typically remote clients, or maybe you're going on vacation and you can't see the house. We don't think that's a reason to miss out on a listing. So we have an entire system to go do videography, and these videos are designed to point out what's wrong with the house, not what's right with the house. Like, we will tell you what we like too, but we're intentionally looking for issues so that there's no surprises. And that video is so different than a marketing video to sell a house. It can't be any more night and day. And those videos often are
no kidding.
30 minutes to 45 minutes, sometimes an hour-long video, 4K sometimes, depending on what we actually need for the situation.
Yeah.
And the speed of turnaround. If we're shooting 4K, it's a much slower upload process. There are more resources involved. It isn't necessary in most cases. But we're shooting it on a gimbaled camera so that you get a really clear view of the image with high-quality equipment. We know what we're doing with videography. That's just one of the many services. So we help you with due diligence. We, of course, help you. So there's 3 phases, right? Let me back up.
I might have more for you too.
Well, I'd love to hear what you say too, Hamish. But phase 1 is understanding neighborhoods, understanding property types, and the value you get for your dollar in whatever price range you're in. And again, this is just buy side. So that's stage one. Stage two is you've decided on the right location, property type, price range. Maybe the agent's hooked you up with their lender of preference or several lenders. They've given you a couple of options. You've got your lender letter. Now you're seriously shopping. Stage two is helping you get the best deal possible on the initial negotiation. 4 years ago in Bidding War Central, it was just getting you a seat at the bidding war table. And today we're just trying to help you get the best possible negotiated deal. And that can involve a detailed understanding of what sort of negotiated commissions are possible and typical. What's the median? We'll show you the data. And then we're going to try to beat the benchmark and get you a better deal than you would have by choosing any other agent. And then once you're under contract, we move into the next phase. And that is all about detailed due diligence. You should already know about neighborhoods and schools, parks, all the basics before you wrote the offer. But now we're looking at the seller's property disclosure. We're looking at the foundation. We're advising you on issues found by the inspector, helping you get estimates to resolve those issues. And many times we've seen a lot of these issues even before we wrote the offer. Like, we've been doing this a long time. So the inspector is catching things we didn't see before you wrote the offer. And you'll be surprised how much you can see after you've been doing this for over 20 years.
No kidding.
And then if there's something found in due diligence, inspections or otherwise, our job is to help you resolve those issues, negotiate something that's fair and reasonable for those unexpected new issues. And if we can't do that, or you just decide you want out, our job is to terminate before the appropriate deadline, before we lose earnest money. So our job is to protect your earnest money throughout that process all the way to the closing table. And that also involves keeping an eye on what's going on with the appraisal and what's going on with the loan. So we do our best to reduce the risk of earnest money loss. And at any point you decide to off-ramp in the transaction, we make sure you do that by the appropriate deadline so that you can get your earnest money back. And of course, you're the one that takes the risk of all those things. I say we make sure, but I want to caveat that with we do our best, because if you intentionally blow deadlines, we can't do anything about it, but we will give you a calendar invite. We will pick up the phone and call you and say, hey, today's the day. We haven't heard from you in 4 days. Mm-hmm. You're risking your earnest money if we don't either terminate or issue an inspection objection today. Like, that sort of stuff is super rare. People are usually pretty communicative, but so you are ultimately, as a buyer, responsible, but we do our best to ensure you're not losing earnest money. And I've only lost earnest money once in 21 years, and that was intentional by my client when at the closing table, they decided that they just can't live with how close this house is to the road. And we had told them about this issue before they even put their money down. And it was a builder contract, and builder contracts have very little exits.
Oh, yeah.
So they lost their earnest money, and they ended up buying a different house with that builder. The builder may have given them a credit or something. I don't get the full details of what happened, but they definitely they lost it. Like, they were out like $25,000 earnest money.
Seriously, ouch.
One time in 21 years, and it was my client who chose that route. There's only so much I can do if they just decide you don't want the house after all the deadlines have expired.
And being okay with losing that too. Must have been really bad noise for me, but
I'm sure it hurt, but he just decided that it's just too close to the busy road.
Yeah.
So sell-side services, we don't often tell you a lot about sell-side services. I'll just recap those really fast, and that is, you should be getting very accurate pricing before you list the home. You should be getting a consultation on all the improvements you should make before you go into photography and videography. We do that with a PowerPoint presentation that's usually 50 plus slides long. And you should get competitive updates on your listing on a weekly or bi-weekly basis at the worst. And that means a look at who are the competitors, which properties are competing with yours every week. And you should be getting solicited feedback, not just automated feedback. Like, actually, your agent should be picking up the phone and talking to other agents about what they saw in the property, what they thought about the property. And that needs to occur throughout the lifespan of the listing. And your agent should be paying to market the house, not just sticking it on the MLS. So you may want to ask them about their marketing budget and where are they placing advertising to help drive traffic to come see your house. And those are all of course, negotiation expertise and prowess come into play. Knowledge about the market, professionalism, availability, all of those things are really important things to consider when you are looking at a negotiation over what commissions to pay. You might want to ask all these other questions too because that's what drives the commissions you pay. And paying that a 2.8 or 3% or 3.2% without getting all these services is ridiculous. Staging too. I forgot about staging. We now include staging in many of our listings.
I'd say too, like, if you're, for whatever reason, commission sensitive and this is the max amount of commission that you want to pay, perhaps it's not a good fit. Like if you're seeing it as this is yeah, exactly. Go for it. Yeah.
How I phrase it is if you're looking for a big discount on commissions, we're not the right team. I mean, this is not a House Einstein pitch podcast, but there are discount brokers that just stick a sign in the yard and you do everything else. And technically it's not allowed in Colorado, like the limited service listings. They still need to do the basic required services in Colorado. The commission has been very clear about that, but there's agents that play games with that and basically stick it all on your end of the table and say you do it all and we'll supervise and it's 1% or it's a flat fee. That's fine. Go for it. That's not us.
Yeah.
We are at the other end of the spectrum, which is we charge slightly more than our competition, but we offer massively more in services, and we're very open to feedback throughout the life of our relationship.
And we work our butts off to make the most value possible for you in this transaction, right?
That's our goal.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing. Well, our goal is not to work the hardest. Our goal is to work the smartest and offer services that actually add value and not a bunch of make-believe, including like private networks and all this other nonsense that doesn't really add value. I attended a party recently, and the seller who I'm friends with, she bought her home before we met, used a well-known agent, and is very happy to have worked with him. And but he didn't have anything special to offer. Like the listing had been on the market for like 150 days by the time she saw it. I don't know if she was aware of that. They did negotiate a decent deal. Like they didn't pay list, but I doubt that the loyalty and service. Like he did a great job of. Well, all right, we're not going to throw we're not going to throw people under the bus that hard. But you may want to look into what you're actually getting before you agree to a listing agreement, a buyer agency agreement, in detail.
Is it the agent that I have a feeling it is?
Probably.
Okay.
And as a rule, House Einstein does not criticize by name. We criticize by category, but we praise by name. And there are lots of great agents out there, but there are also lots of questionable agents some of whom have impressive portfolios, some of whom have dominant market share, but aren't really doing much. And they're kind of trading on reputation of many decades. But when you negotiate with these people day in and day out, and you see what they're actually doing, it's not what most people outside the industry think is actually happening. And we'll leave it at that.
I mean, a pretty nice way to put it. Are we ready?
We're ready to move on. So let's talk about a couple of other things you might not know. And when you are thinking about marketing your home, the importance of story is crucial, not just for videography, but also for still photography. And when you are thinking about the marketing story of your property, this is a conversation you should be having with your agent. Ideally, they're coming to you already with, here's the story of your listing. Here are the likely people that are interested in buying this listing, given its location, property type, updates. Yeah, what's the archetype of your potential buyer? And that's what all the marketing should be designed around. And increasingly, and I'm going to say this is something that we're working on, improving, and that is not just showing you a video of sexy images moving slowly, but actually working on telling you the story of this home and helping you distinguish features of the home from the competition. Because it is so common that buyer's agents will schedule a showing, they won't even read the listing description, and they don't know how to help a buyer see the distinguishing characteristics of this home versus others. And so we're starting to do that more. You'll see an example of it in a recent vertical video that was shot during an open house. I had a break and I said, I'm going to do a little bit of content. It's less than, I think, 2 minutes long. And I just point out a few things that buyers may not know when they walk in the door, particularly around south-facing properties, shadow lines, build-out potential, passive and active solar. All of that is really important if at any point in the future you think you might want to expand the footprint of this house, add a second story. maybe an ADU, or in some cases even a secondary dwelling, given you could potentially subdivide some of these lots.
Yeah.
And that's really important to understand, that might be coming for these larger lots if they drop subdivision from 8,000 square feet to 3,000. That's what the city was talking about this summer in this particular zoning.
Jeez.
So that, I don't think most buyers agents have any clue about that being a huge component of the property's value. So doing a little video to walk people through that potential is something that is really valuable. And video is so much more dynamic than written words, even more dynamic than still photos.
Yeah, massively. And I think it's, we call it like a work of mastery, right? We're always going to be working on improving our skill set and our marketing skills. And I think it's really nice what we're doing is we're beginning to have kind of almost different legs or arms of the content we make. Like, we're more than capable of making a pretty video of a house, but now we're really getting down to the nitty-gritty of communicating the true actual value and really kind of speaking to specific, I wouldn't call it targeted advertising, especially with HUD, but I would call it really informative and kind of clear marketing. And it's really exciting to kind of be pushing towards that and effectively communicating value to the masses.
I mean, what Hamish just alluded to was fair housing law.
Yeah.
Like, you have to be really careful to not discriminate against certain protected classes, which of course we don't. Yeah. But we also are cognizant that has happened in the past. And so we certainly, by creating a buyer archetype, are not only marketing to that type of buyer, but we are telling a story that we think might appeal to the buyer that is most likely to be interested in this home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or go ahead.
And that's not based on their protected class. That might be based on what they're. I mean, it's actually a little tricky to get into this without tripping over all these rules that exist. So let's stop at that point, Hamish. Nice. But it's very important that you brought that up. I think that you really should be asking yourself a different question, and that question is, what moves the needle? When you are looking at listings online as a buyer, imagine yourself, if you're a seller, as a buyer and looking at a variety of listings, and ask yourself, what is moving the needle for you? And ask yourself, what's moving the needle for you online in general? Look at your feeds on social media and see how much of your feeds are video versus still images. And unfortunately, for humans, our neurons are triggered by moving imagery much more than still imagery, and probably in another order of magnitude over written word. So in order of importance, written word is really, you can't have a sloppy listing description, but your video really needs to tell this, not just the sexy images, but tell the story of the home. And that's what we're trying to get to. The photos and the written word also need to tell the story, but don't forget that the video too has a story, and compelling story is, ask yourself why TikTok is so darn popular. We're not going to put dancing people in our videos yet. Yet. We can't do that. We could, I suppose. Maybe people would watch that. But that's not the right audience we're trying to attract. Yeah. Right? We're trying to attract serious buyers, not random teenagers on TikTok.
Right. Yeah, it's a balance. And I think closing out before we scooch on over to the next topic, there is kind of that hook for views, and then there's hook to properly communicate to the people that we're properly trying to communicate. Real buyers, people genuinely interested in the area. And so there's a balance, but it's something we are mastering. And I think, being cognizant of talking about it here in the podcast, and also being confident enough to bring it up to prospective clients and everything, we are making an effort, and we are making genuine progress on it too.
Right. Well, I think what's important to reflect back is that mastery is not something that you achieve once and you're done. Mm-hmm. I'm very confident in saying the quality of our marketing product is in the top 5% of everything I see in real estate marketing. And I feel like we are moving rapidly into the top 1% if we're not already there. But even when we're there at top 1% of marketing,
we're not done.
We're not done.
Yeah.
Mastery is a journey, not a destination. And so philosophically, our team is constantly thinking about how to improve what we do. and how to make it more effective. And we ask ourselves what moves the needle all the time. And that is something that if you're considering hiring an agent, you too should be asking. And don't be fooled by the brokerage name, because most of these brokerages will bring on anyone that can pass a real estate exam and stay in the industry a few years. That's it, right? Like
fog and mirror, I think you say. Yeah.
Fog and mirror is a little extreme. Like I did recently see a note that Compass had refused to allow a new agent in because they didn't have 3 years of experience. And they may require you to have a minimum commission generation every year. That totally makes sense, having hired new agents and realizing that it's a crapshoot. Some new agents are amazing and put in the time, put in the work, and have the work ethic and the professionalism. And some agents want you to pretend they have all that. Some people, and it turns out they don't have any of that. And you don't know until you start working with people. But proxy for quality is certainly determination and an ability to stay in the industry, the ability to generate enough leads, but Compass, or enough deals. Compass, I guess, is now refusing agents that don't have at least 3 years. But a lot of brokerages don't care. They just are happy to take you if you can get a license and you'll pay a desk fee.
Different strokes.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's move on because we are under a time crunch today, and so we're going to go faster. We're going to talk about market conditions. And if you are a House Einstein subscriber to our newsletter, you have received the first newsletter in many months. And in that newsletter, we talk about the tale of three markets. And it looks like Boulder has trifurcated. The high end is stagnant with over 10 months of inventory. The mid-range, which for most people is a luxury price range, but in Boulder is not, is looking very balanced. And the entry level is, as always, people are desperate for inventory, and there's a line of people that are interested in buying homes like that relative to the supply of houses. It might be 2 or 3 months of inventory at the entry level, 5 to 6 months at the mid-range, more of a balanced market between buyers and sellers. And at the high end of the market, there's over 10 months of inventory, and that is brutal. And we'll talk about that a little more when we talk about the sales of the week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you nail it all? Did you cover all of that?
I just covered the fresh listings this
hour.
We still have a couple of other bullets here to talk about. Let me hit the last two, and then we'll touch on the second one last. Does that make sense? So we'll talk about the pace of rate cuts in just a second. Let's give you a little bit more market insight effective today. So it is now, let's call it late October. It's October 23rd as we're recording this, and as of today, 21.9% of detached single-family houses are under contract. And that implies 4.6 months of inventory. Most of that is at the high end, 3 million plus. And for houses, it's 15%. For condos and townhomes, it's 15% under contract. And that implies a 6.7 month supply of inventory. This is the worst uptake or absorption of inventory I've seen since 2009. And that means two different things. For buyers, you have great selection, and also whether you're buying a condo or a house, there's great selection, right? It's even better if you're in the condo or townhome market, but if you're in the single-family house market, there's amazing inventory. There's a lot of price reductions happening, particularly above 3 million. And if your agent is telling you, if you fly into town and your agent is saying, hey, you better make an offer on this because a house like this is going to go fast, and implies that there's no suitable alternative, fire this agent right away and get a better agent. I don't know what else to tell you, because you should not feel any pressure if you are in 3 million plus in the city of Boulder to be aggressive on a listing. There's tons of alternatives. For every buyer, there's 10 houses to consider, maybe 9 houses that are available for you to buy. Mm-hmm. And that means you have leverage to negotiate. That means you can be really selective, and you should be really patient to get the right house. But this is the fourth quarter and the best time to be negotiating that. Entry level, of course, different story, opposite end of the market. You might have to be aggressive, and then you have to understand which homes are worth being aggressive on and which ones absolutely are not. But you too still have better selection than you had in many years, even at the entry level. Condos appear to be, I wouldn't say in free fall, but there's a lot of options right now. And of course, the investor market's dead because prices rose so quickly and rates have now risen. They're back almost up to their record highs. That means nothing cash flows. So is this a impasse between buy and sell side? It might be for condos and townhomes. And if you're an investor like our recent client that's looking for a property for their adult child that's attending CU, this is really good news if you're a cash buyer in particular. So sell side, this means doing your homework. Make sure you're pricing appropriately. And if you can avoid being in the 3 million plus category for a single family house, drop it below 3, you're probably going to be in much better competition. You're going to have more options, in other words. Well, let me put this other way. You are more likely to sell your property. You have less competition out below 3 million.
Yeah, absolutely. I almost want to say, sell side, if you can avoid it, don't. But I think that's a given,
So don't sell your house?
Yeah.
Well, we've already told several sellers to wait till the spring. This market's rough, and it's fourth quarter, which is the slowest time of year. But you may want to wait even longer because the last bullet point, Fed governors are saying that the pace of rate cuts will be slower. And it's several Fed governors. Kashkari is one of them. Schmidt is another one. There was news articles about that this week. None of that's really a surprise. The market in general has been pricing that in, the bond market, not the real estate market. And so what is the net effect? So the 10-year Treasury and the 30-year fixed rate mortgage tend to be very closely correlated, even though they're not directly connected. And I think that given the pace of rate cuts will be slower, according to the Fed, you can expect the market recovery perhaps to take a little longer. And that might mean that this inventory situation could continue into the first quarter. In fact, I think it probably will. The first quarter could still be a pretty good buying opportunity, although there'll be less selection than there is now.
Yeah.
At least in January and February. In March, it might kick back up to about where we are now.
I mean, fingers crossed, right? A little bit. But if you're a buyer and you can manage these rates, not a bad time. I don't
know if that's...
Go ahead.
No.
I almost want to do the cliche saying, which is, right, like, buy when rates are high, sell when rates are low. But, I mean, that's obviously tranched out, too. And I think I relate a little bit closer to the entry-level pricing, just because that's kind of my sect. And that, I think, is where I'm thinking about it.
Across the board, we are seeing price cuts for listings that began this spring and continue through the market into the fall. And these price cuts are significant. And it's not true for every property. New construction, modern homes, you don't see that pattern. But if it's an older home, the comps could have been 1.7 or 1.8 this spring and are now 1.2 and 1.3. And we're seeing that in places in Boulder. So our history in this market has been one of lucky if you could find a home worth buying, and valuing that much more than valuing small negotiated discounts. And today there's a lot of selection, and you have a lot more opportunity, a lot more leverage to negotiate a better deal for yourself. And that is particularly true at the higher end. So that covers market conditions, and I think we should move on, Hamish.
Yeah. Keeping time in mind, I think we're going to be doing our, 2.5 minute speed run of the sales of the week.
Well, just another reminder before we jump into sales of the week that we have an amazing condo coming on market, likely right after the election. We're going to hold off. The seller's making some improvements, and given the turmoil around the U.S. presidential election and uncertainty that a lot of people feel, we've decided that we, meaning the seller and our team, have decided to focus on making the listing go active right after the election. But it is a live-work unit. It is in a great location in North Boulder. These aren't that common, and if you're looking for it, reach out to us.
Yeah.
Sales of the week?
Yep.
All right, let's get into it.
Haystack
Mountain, Hamish.
The windows real quick.
Used to be a golf course.
Did it?
I played on it like the week before it closed for the first time.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
And it sold. I remember when you wrote about this one in the newsletter.
Do you remember what newsletter it was? It was a while ago, so I don't quite remember myself.
I'm sure I could
But
deep dive it. It might be in the relevant links in the show notes, but for now, I don't know.
That's right. We're supposed to be keeping track of all of the properties we
actually,
ever have.
we have the Osmond score sheet. Let me look it up.
Right. Well, it doesn't really matter. You don't need to look it up, Hamish. We did write about it previously, and Haystack Mountain was sold to a developer, and this is not that long ago, and that developer has decided to go ahead and sell the property, and they listed it 700 days ago, which is almost
a little while.
Yeah, I mean let's just call it 2 years ago, and they originally listed it at 8.9 million. It contained they originally listed it at 12.9 million in 2022, and it was sold
I remember
for 6.2 million this week. It closed yesterday. It closed yesterday for 6.2. So less than half of what it was originally listed for. Haystack is an amazing piece of geography. It's over 100 acres of land. It has water rights. It has mineral rights. And it allows for multiple private residences, subdivided lots. At least it looks like 3 35-acre parcels, which 35 acres is the state minimum for subdivision. No conservation easements, incredible views. And I mean, I'm sad to not have the golf course anymore. 100%. I'm not a development shill, but this is what it is we're 3 buildable lots. And for some reason, the developer decided to get out, and they listed it. I don't know if this was all of it. I think there might be 1 or 2 lots they held on to. I think Markel was the original acquirer and then reseller of these lots. And it probably makes sense for them to sell it to a company that just does custom luxury homes versus Markel that tends to focus on subdivisions. And I think now that it is finally transacted, they did put it up for concierge auctions. So concierge auctions is a third party. They will conduct an auction for you. And that auction bought a top bidder of 6.2 million, less than half of the original list price, and it closed last week. So that we hope to see some gorgeous homes up there, or actually, what I hope is nothing happens, but because I really like the open space, frankly, and I do miss the golf course, but that's wishful thinking. It will be 3 very large, luxurious homes sometime in the next 5 years. It probably will take 2 years to 3 years to build each of those houses, and it's unclear whether the buyer will do that on spec. It could also have been an individual that bought all 3 and is going to build one house. We don't know anything about who the buyer is, but it's worth noting that this property did finally transact after more than 2 years and sold for eventually less than 50% of what the seller originally hoped the property would fetch.
Yeah, I'm looking at the parcel map and the topography on there, and it looks like the way that they've kind of separated it out, almost every piece of land gets a portion of Haystack. So everybody gets a little, claim to lay. But yeah,
I don't know why I just am not excited by it. I mean, I've been involved in developments before. It's just worth noting what a parcel of land that large might go for when it isn't restricted into development, and they weren't able to do any sort of subdivision on it other than the 35-acre minimum lot. In other words, it's not a giant neighborhood of houses. Mm-hmm. It's going to be 3 very luxurious houses, or maybe 1 luxurious monster house. I mean, it could be, a Zuckerberg who bought it is going to put a giant fence around the whole thing and build 3 family compound with 3 estates on it. I mean, we don't really know who's buying it, or who bought it.
Yeah, no doubt. It's cool. Hopefully it stays barren for a little bit longer. It's just a fun kind of landmark I like to see when I'm driving up 36 there.
It's beautiful. It's a piece of history, and it's geographically very interesting. It's north of Boulder, if people don't know where we're talking about. It does look like a big haystack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
I like to think it's like a miniature volcano or something, but that's not the case.
All right, Let's move on to the next one. 65 Circle Drive. So this property is on the west side of town. It might be, so there's a few properties on the west side of town right below Flagstaff that are technically in unincorporated Boulder County, and that has some influence over their valuation because of a different regulatory regime for permits in unincorporated Boulder County versus City of Boulder. But this property had been on the market about 35 days, and it was the first listing period. It hit the market in August at $3.2 million. After about a month, they cut the price to just below 3, which is where the market suddenly wakes up. And about 10 days after dropping that price to just below $3 million, it went under contract, and it sold for $2.735, which is not a massive discount to the $3 million price point. I think that's, let's do the math.
It was 3.2, right? It was initially listed at.
Originally 3.2, but then dropped to 3. I mean, $299, $999, which,
yeah, I mean, Walmart pricing.
Yeah, I know. You've Walmart. That's just horrible marketing. It's really dumb to remind people of discount retail stores when you price a $3 million listing, but whatever. So 2.735 over 3 is like an 8.9%, 8.8% discount. So not atypical to see 6 to 8% negotiated discounts, but this listing wasn't stale. It had only been available for 25 days, and it went under contract at day 35, so probably back it up 3 or 4 days from that point. And they got an 8.3% discount. But why is this home valuable? Well, first and foremost, it's a very large house. Well, it's larger than most. It's not a very large house, but it's larger than most at 6,500 square feet, 6 bedroom, 5 bath. Originally built in the 50s, but likely had a remodel done in maybe the 90s. 2 car attached garage. Decent sized lot at almost a little over 13,000 square feet, close proximity to Chautauqua, and only $417 a square, but of course that tends to relate to the size of the house. Buyer, of course, was a cash buyer, and it closed on October 17th. So I think this was actually a really good buy because of the difficulty in building homes of this size and the location. You're surrounded by other luxurious homes and affluent homeowners, and you're in such close proximity to Chautauqua. The only downside of this location, other than you need some really strong legs to go up and down, is the potential for some traffic noise from Flagstaff. So you get Harley Davidsons in the summer, and that, because of the topography and depending on the house, you might get some sound exposure. So whenever I've represented buyers looking in this location, one of the first things I want them to do is go stand in the backyard with me and let's listen for traffic noise, because it can surprise people how it bounces around down the hill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, looking at this from satellite view, right, I would have thought it, sound wouldn't have been an issue, but you have the experience and the kind of wherewithal to say, no, go do the backyard check.
Well, it may not be an issue. Let me be clear. It may not be an issue. It just depends on the house. I've heard backyards that you can hear it very clearly, and others where you don't hear it at all. And there's no way to know for sure unless you do a sound check.
Yeah. Go to it in person. Yeah. And it doesn't lay us up for the next one about that, but...
I don't have a Harley Davidson, but I'm more than happy to go ride my motorcycle up and down and rev the engine. We've actually done that for clients with my truck, right? Yeah. Where we had the sound pressure meter, and you drove back and forth to see what an impact it would have from inside the house. That was a remote client who did close, but that was very, very sound sensitive.
That was like one of the first things that I did working here. That's great. Good memory. Shall we move on?
Absolutely. And I think I saw some study about the more successful people are, the more they become very sensitive to sound. Like there's some weird correlation. Or maybe it's just the older they get. I don't know. Something like that.
Hearing that, suddenly I'm sensitive to sound.
Right. How's our sound, Hamish?
It's excellent.
Okay, let's move on to the next property. I closed the window. Where'd it go?
A Phoenix Reborn. 924 Eldorado Lane, Louisville.
All right, hold on. There it goes. And let me put this window in the right spot so it looks like I'm looking at the camera. All right, there we go. 924 Eldorado. You are correct, sir. So this is a Marshall Fire rebuild. And as many people know, the Marshall Fire took out, I think, over 1,000 houses. And it's taken, I think, about 2 years to get these houses reconstructed. And this particular house is absolutely beautiful. It was completed this year, and it sold for $2 million flat after a significant period on the market. So I think what happened in this situation is they started marketing the property while it was still under construction. They listed it at 2.15 in March of this year, and then in August they relisted it with same agent, but they refreshed it, I should say, and it was refreshed at $2,050,000. So they basically knocked $100,000 off. And that got the market moving. It took about 35 days, but they did go under contract a little over a month later. And that eventual buyer negotiated another 50 off, and it closed at 2. And the property itself is I mean, it's beautiful. It's brand new construction. I don't know what People's Choice. I don't know what people, like it says, it's Parade of Home Dream Homes, People's Choice Award winner, triple exclamation point in the listing description. Okay. I mean, I would ignore all of that. I don't know what any of that means.
I don't remember getting asked.
I've been doing this 21 years, and I have no idea what the hell that means. Like, who are these people, and what other choices do they have but to award this winner? But I will say the home is beautiful, even so. And it's a good data point for those that are considering Marshall Fire rebuild houses, new build in the Marshall Fire footprint and the burn scar. The nice thing about new build is you get things like a home warranty. You know, no one else has ever lived in the house, if that matters to you. And this home is well designed. It's net zero. All of the things inside look really pretty. It has a solar PV system, heat pumps, all this stuff that's great. But it also is in close proximity. Excuse me, I need to cough, Hamish. I'm going to pause for 1 second because my throat is getting froggy. Hold on a sec. Dear listener, I'm giving you the mute button while I cough so you don't have to hear that. So it's sold for $2 million or $469 a square. The issue, I think, the biggest issue is its proximity to the neighbor. And you can see this in some of the photos of the listing. And it's only the photos of the exterior. I mean, the inside just, it's a catalog of what is pretty much current in house design. Mm-hmm. Nothing objectionable. No colors are all great. You can see new build going on all over the place from the windows of the home. And the brassy colors are getting brassier on all the fixtures. That's happening as a trend. But the house is great. I mean, what's to argue with other than how close the neighbor's house is?
Seriously.
But, I mean, for $2 million, you can't get close to this. I mean, you're only 15 minutes from the city of Boulder, probably a 10 to 12 minute bike ride to downtown Louisville. And Louisville is an incredible town. It's not in, I mean, it's an incredible small town. It was rated Smart Money Magazine's like #1 small town in America in like 2007 or something. It's really close to Davidson Mesa open space, so that's really nice. Mm-hmm. But it also, it isn't so close to downtown that you're going to stroll to downtown. You might ride a bike to downtown, but you're probably not going to walk to downtown Louisville. Yeah. And of course, if you're into Costco or Target, you are like 5 minutes, dangerously close to Costco.
There's a kind of an interconnected like bike system. So I think you're probably right on the 10 to 15 to Old Town. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, yes, there are bike paths. There are ways to get from this house to downtown Louisville, Old Town Louisville. Mm-hmm. But something else worth mentioning is that you can hop through Marshall Mesa and get on the US 36 bikeway. So with an e-bike, you could probably beat the traffic that's stuck trying to get out of Boulder every day, because that giant ski ramp, as somebody recently pointed out, that straight shot up the US 36 bikeway, you can hop off onto Marshall Mesa from there, and that will bring you in such close proximity to this particular house. So it's not a bad spot.
Yeah, no kidding. And I mean, I used to work there, so I have to shout it out, but there's the Louisville Rec Center that is recently remodeled that's just across via Appia Way. They have ice rink there too, and then the police station's right there on that intersection as well, if that's a concern for you. But yeah, cool home.
924 Eldorado Lane is the address of that house. Mm-hmm. All right, let's move on.
Yeah.
703 Delwood Avenue. This home was historic, originally built in 1900 in Newlands, and it's on a large lot, 8,600 square feet, which is probably 30% bigger than your typical lot size. It is zoned RL1, and the house had fallen into such decrepit condition that the home had already been granted full demolition approval from Boulder Historic Preservation, which is a really big deal because if you're buying a pre-war house in Newlands, there's a really good chance somebody lived in that house, or the architecture of that house, somebody important to the city lived in that house, or the architecture of that house is something that preservationists want to preserve, which could potentially derail you if you're trying to start over again from a fresh lot. But this one, they did a good job in determining, this is what you should do. If you realize the house is a scrape, go ahead and apply for the demo permit before you list it, because it's a risk overhang to the buyer. Every risk you put on the buyer's side of the table has a cost associated with it. And by removing this risk, you increase the value of the transaction dramatically. And that's what the seller did, which, I give them kudos. And they also helped us establish what a lot like this is worth. So they listed it at 1.2, and it was listed in July, originally at 1.4. They dropped it to 1.2 in September, and then it went under contract 2 weeks after it was dropped to 1.2, and it sold for 1.15. So the value of an east-west lot on a corner close to North Boulder Park, like we're basically kitty corner from North Boulder Park, is 1.15 plus the cost to demo it. So I would budget probably about 50 grand to completely deconstruct the house. I said demo, but really in Boulder that means deconstruct, because you were required to take it down to the studs and reuse materials. So let's call it 1.2 is the value of an 8,600 square foot lot in Newlands that is east-west facing but has southern exposure because it is on the corner of Delwood and 7th. So that location is actually a really good comp for establishing dirt value for a lot very similar to our listing at 605 Alpine, which is listed at 1.4 and has a house that we think is worth preserving that you shouldn't be scraping. But that's what a dirt lot currently is valued at of this size, and most lots are not this size, so keep that in mind. And I look forward to seeing this house once it is completely removed. I can't wait to see what they build here. It's going to be super interesting, given the large lot size and its location, kitty corner to North Boulder Park.
I've got a question for you, but I don't know as far as time goes.
No, go for it. For you, I have endless amounts of time.
This type of deconstructed scrape type of listing here, it looks to me as though it's an east-west facing current home, but because you're going to scrape it and it's on this kind of corner here, could you make it a north-south, or how would that, does it matter?
The driveway may still end up being on 7th Street, but you 100% can and should orient the house to the south. So the house is almost certainly going to have two what are called yard setbacks, and it's going to have two front yard setbacks. It's going to have a setback on Delwood, and it's going to have a setback on 7th Street. It almost certainly has two front yard setbacks, which are both going to push the house back into the corner of the lot, but with 8,000 plus square feet, you have plenty of space. So in my opinion, and I'm not an architect, but the right move is to design the house as a south-facing house, maximize your passive and active solar, make sure you get great natural light by having it south-facing, and the city is probably going to force you to have the driveway on Delwood. But you might still orient the whole front of the house. Right. There's also an alley, but the city of Boulder is going to how you could turn the house 90 degrees and not have the driveway. You could have the driveway on 7th and have the house face south. Absolutely. That's what I would do.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I was wondering if it's like, if the legacy home is in this orientation, if Boulder has a requirement that you also have to do that orientation, or something like that. No.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a requirement, but what is worth pointing out is that you likely are going to have amazing views depending on Well, maybe. I have not stood on the sidewalk in front of that house, much less fly a drone over it. But portions of the park have I think it's a little further to the east, was where you get that clear shot to the Flatirons. I don't think it's going to have the shot to the Flatirons. That would basically, if it had the visibility to the Flatirons, you could probably add another 10% to the market value of the lot. So
if it gets a second story, maybe.
Even with a second story, it's not the same thing as you walk out your front door and have that like picture perfect Flatiron view over North Boulder Park.
1380 Knox Drive.
Right. If you picture perfect to the Flatirons that are listing in South Boulder. Yeah. That 10% is a good rule of thumb. It could be as much as 15% for the protected view corridor. So keep that in mind if you are pricing your home, or your scrapable, as Hamish called it, but it's really deconstruct, a property that is mostly valued by the dirt. The dirt is worth a lot more if it has a protected view.
Yeah. Nice.
Let me add a little piece there. Protected does not mean forever protected in all cases. In most situations, you are not paying a premium for a view unless you can ascertain that the city is very unlikely to develop anything in that spot that would block your view. And there's no guarantees in life, but you're far less likely if it's owned by the city and it's currently being used as a residence as a park.
Yeah. Yeah, good distinctions to make here.
Well, look, someday out of control city council might be like, you know what needs to go here is more affordable housing. I mean, they're putting in like hundreds of affordable, never going to be a Walmart. Walmart didn't even survive in Boulder. They snuck in a shop right next to 24-Hour Fitness in the Iris Plaza off the diagonal. This is like 7 years ago, and that shop lasted less than 2 years, and Walmart closed it because it wasn't generating the revenue.
That is such good news. Okay. Are you ready to go next? I really like that. That makes me like Boulder a whole lot more, honestly.
Yeah. All right, so we have one more to go. And this particular property, the address is 385 Seminole. And the reason it's worth talking about is because it's right up against Foothills Parkway. And we do have clients that own homes nearby, and certainly many clients that own homes or would like to buy homes in South Boulder. And what you see with homes that are in a compromised location is that they typically sell for a pretty substantial discount to what the home might have sold for if it was even just one block further away from the super busy streets. So if you're not familiar with Boulder, Foothills Parkway is constant traffic, and it has a lot of traffic noise. A significant degree of air pollution for sure is coming off of the tires and off the exhaust of all those cars going back and forth. There is a berm that was constructed. I mean, it's when the parkway was constructed, I think, is when they put the berm in. And certainly has been there for the over 20 years I've lived in this town. Yeah. And that berm, that earth berm, protects a lot of the houses from the sound and noise, the noise pollution. Maybe not so much from the air pollution to a degree, but if you build a second story on those houses, you're definitely going to get the exposure for all the traffic noise. And then that berm goes away at some point and it flattens out. And so a good rule of thumb is to expect anywhere from 15 to 20% lower in market value for having that traffic exposure. And this particular property, I think, was priced really aggressively. So they originally listed it not so aggressively at $1.2 million in July, and then they started playing a game I like to call Guess the Price, and started cutting the price really rapidly, almost systematically. And so it dropped to 1.18. So they cut it 110, and then they cut it another 60,000, and then they cut it another 30,000, and then they cut it another 100,000. And so they had multiple guesses on price, finally dropping the price to it went under contract when it was listed at $1 million, but that contract fell apart for whatever reason, so they dropped the price another $5,000 to $995. And at that point, 5 days later, somebody said, boy, $995 for a 2,400 square foot house in the city of Boulder that was built on a big lot. I mean, maybe they come from a busier city and they don't care about the traffic noise, or maybe like me, they're slightly hard of hearing and they don't care about the traffic noise. or they just needed the home next. It could be the neighbor that lives next door and wanted to buy a home for their aging parents. Unclear why they bought it, but $945 is what it eventually sold for, which was another 5% below, about 5% below the last list price. And the way to think about this is that buying a home in a compromised location like this, you really should expect to not have it appreciate as quickly as the neighbors that are not in a compromised location. But you have a home in the city of Boulder, really close to schools and parks, really, really close to bike paths, for $945, and it's a substantial 2,400 square foot bi-level with a pretty decent design. I mean, the overall interior of the house hadn't been updated in a while. They staged it anyway, but you can see the kitchen, looks like it's from the 80s.
Yeah.
And the bathrooms maybe the 90s, but hardwood floors.
And the exterior I really like. A little updating, maybe some paint and some trim work, maybe a new driveway. But that exterior is almost a timeless design.
Yeah, it actually it sort of is. It reminds me of the Brady Bunch house.
I gotta look that
in
up.
some ways. Those concrete. Sorry, the brick. You're not looking it up. The brick tower-ish looking things on the front of the bi-level are strangely appealing. I mean, it's a comfortable house with a lot of space. So 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, 2-car attached garage at a price point that I think is super reasonable. There's a chance it's going to turn into a rental instead of being owner-occupied. And you're right, the backyard is spectacular because this lot is almost double what you typically see in South Boulder for lot sizes.
Yeah. Definitely go see it in person, right?
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And go stand in the backyard and decide if you can handle the traffic noise. I will add that a few years ago, we were looking really close at a property on Vivian Circle, which is a little further to the north, also right up against Foothills Parkway, also on a really big lot. And we even went so far as to look at the bike path plans because they were redoing the tunnel there from a bridge, sort of a mousetrap bridge, to an underground tunnel. And we couldn't figure out where the concrete wall was going to stop and whether or not it would protect, because they built a new concrete sound wall in that location. And we couldn't make the determination whether it would protect that property on Vivian or not. It turned out to massively protect that property. And the property had been in distress, was in rough condition, the price was right. And the 2 big risk overhangs were the sound and the wall that eventually was constructed, whether or not it would cover it, and also whether the tunnel would attract camping activity by unhoused people. And those 2 risk factors were too much. So that's why we ended up not going under contract. So lots of interesting opportunities up against Foothills Parkway. It's not the worst place in the world, but you really need to be prepared to deal with that sound issue and pollution issue if you buy on anything adjacent to a road as busy as Foothills Parkway.
Yeah, hard agree. Okay. I think we're doing pretty.
All right,
decent
Hamish,
on
we
time.
did not run the timer.
No, we didn't.
We did last week. But I think we're getting faster at this section, so I don't know if anybody wants to comment. If you like the timer or don't like the timer, please let us know. This time we didn't do the timer. I think we still got through it pretty quick for 5 properties, and hopefully 5 properties that help educate you on what the market's like here in Boulder, all the way from land sales down to a relatively affordable property, but in a compromised location.
Yeah, transitioning over. I think we've discussed it in a few podcasts, and I kind of have this interest in nuclear stuff for whatever reason. This news article is about the Rocky Mountain Flats, old kind of nuclear weapons manufacturing facility that is no longer in Colorado. It's kind of right between the Broomfield, Westminster, and Boulder area. There's some open space to the southwest of 36. And it used to be a facility to make nuclear weapons, and it's since been the kind of spot for a lot of controversy. There was a cleanup there. Prior to the cleanup, there were 2 plutonium fires while the factory was operating, and you can even search that and see where the fallout was. It was kind of all the way east, Westminster, Thornton, and almost I think to like I-25 and 144th is where the major impact zones are, but that's a Googleable thing. Since then, Rocky Flats, as it's known, has turned into a national wildlife refuge and open space. There's official trails through there, and there's kind of been this intergovernmental project to create more trails and more access out into that area. Controversy has persisted. The official story is that it is okay and safe. However, a 2019 soil sample came up, and I think it produced plutonium levels like 5 times above the norm, which kind of continued to fuel the controversies and people's concerns about safety. And as such, Westminster has recently backed out and will not contribute $200,000 that they had kind of pledged to the to the project. And there's some streets kind of bordering this large open space. One of them is Indiana, and I take it on my way to Boulder because it's my scenic route. And they just repaved it. But what I noticed kind of more recently in the past 2 weeks is they've got kind of a rebar for a bridge, and it's better than news than I thought. I thought that they were going to start developing and putting houses on there, but it's a social trail. It's going to be a bike trail to get people over onto Rocky Flats to kind of recreate. To my understanding, that's still going down, and Jefferson County is still very committed to completing this project and kind of making it more of a recreation space than it already is. But Westminster has since pulled out and is not going to be contributing the dollars.
Do you have any idea how much the U.S. government has spent on Rocky Flats?
Oh, that might be in the article.
Without looking it up.
I think we're in the billions. I think we're like $7 billion.
You're right. $7 billion. The site was operational until 1989, and the project was cleaned up and completed the cleanup in 2005. Over $7 billion, and then it was converted into the wildlife refuge and opened to the public 6 years ago in 2018. And there have been lots and lots of people saying it was never cleaned up properly, that it's still radioactive, and you've cruised around with your Geiger counter and discovered what?
Well, important distinction: the Geiger counter doesn't pick up the radioactivity that plutonium would put off. So yeah, I got just background, but yeah, plutonium's an alpha emitter to my understanding, and my Geiger counter doesn't do that. So yeah, I unfortunately didn't discover a whole lot.
How do you measure alpha emissions?
So it's the same emission that like a radon detector would detect, because radon's also an alpha emitter. I don't think like the Airthings radon detector that I have isn't a real-time updater, so that wouldn't be good. But I think the dedicated specified alpha detectors are pretty expensive. They might be coming down in price now, but they were kind of prohibitive when I was making my silly Geiger counter purchase to begin with. But yeah, it's tough to really know. Honestly, the environmentalist and conservationist in me is happy that it's going to stay this way and won't get developed. I think as far as recreation goes, and this is kind of your own risk assessment, and then there's the official story too, I think it's fine to recreate on it. There are places that people have lived for hundreds of years that have extremely high background radiation. And you don't hear about that, but I think the risk should be known, and the history shouldn't be kind of washed away. Not that it is, but there could be some benefit to some more public awareness about it. Radiation has been a scary term in the U.S. for a long time,
Anecdotally, this is maybe 12 years ago, maybe 14 years ago, I had people from my motorcycling community referred to me that were moving here. And I had lunch with them or coffee with them and then sent them on their merry way with a map. I was like, here are all the different neighborhoods. Why don't you drive around, and if you like something, let me know, and we'll look at helping you take next steps in your purchase journey relocating here. I didn't realize how what's the word? Like,
ready
some
to
people
go.
make very sporadic, spontaneous decisions.
Impulsive.
That's the word, impulsive. I didn't realize how impulsive these people were. And I met with them the next day, and they're like, Osmond, we drove around, we had a really good time, and we happened by this place called Candelas, and we saw a model, and they looked great, so we went ahead and put a deposit down. And I said, oh, I'm okay, great, congratulations, because I knew at that time it's a builder contract. You're never getting your deposit back, and I don't represent you, and I'm sorry that you're buying in this location. I didn't know as much as I now know about Candelas and Rocky Flats, but I've often thought about those people that didn't do their due diligence, didn't talk to their agent that they were initially talking to. I wasn't involved, so officially I wasn't their agent.
Right.
I didn't make any money. I didn't get paid. I had lunch, or I had 2 meetings with them. But I really wish they had not bought at Candelas, and I hope they're doing okay. And it's not necessarily the risk of increased cancer or other problems, although that could be the case. I don't know. I'm not convinced either way. Yeah. There's enough data both sides, but one thing that I do know is the way that location is perceived by people that know its history.
Yeah.
And so the perception of it being right next to a Superfund site is probably enough to really diminish the long-term value of the asset. And that's what in addition to the potential health concerns.
In a real estate
framework. I'm thinking about it like an investment analyst going, geez, don't buy there. I don't care. I'm so happy you got your 2-car garage. Yeah. Brand new construction. No one's ever lived in that home. But you also bought right next to a Superfund site, and you didn't give me an opportunity to advise you. So there's nothing for me to do other than say good luck.
Congrats. Welcome to the state.
Welcome to Colorado.
Yeah, Colorado likes its like Blucifer, the horse, right at DIA, and there's a few other kind of interesting statues. There's one right by the Candelas development, which is a horse in full hazmat with a gas mask on. So like
there is not.
There is. Not. Yeah, I'll send you the link.
It must be on private land.
No, it looks like I'll put the link in the description, and I'll send you the link. But
but what I'm saying is, it's not the official statue of Candelas. It must be somebody's private property that they're setting. I think
this one is a publicly commissioned one.
I have a hard time believing that, but okay, maybe.
Yeah, I'll find it.
Let's keep moving on the news because we are almost out of time. So we're going to kind of brush through this a little quickly. We will provide links in the show notes, and eventually these links should also make their way to our website, Hamish, under the podcast.
In those show notes too.
Link, the podcast page. But Broomfield has a new downtown in the works, part 2, and then there's a part 1 that you may want to think about. And why is Broomfield making downtowns? Well, historically it has not had one because it was a suburb of Denver and of Boulder. A very inexpensive place to buy a house, and never had an actual downtown. And this creation of artificial downtowns in places like Superior and also second attempt in Broomfield, it's got mixed results, right? Like Vail definitely has a Disney World-like downtown area, and Disney World itself has its own Main Street or whatever they call it. But it's not authentic, and people know that. And so I think that ultimately, in my opinion, these experiments with new downtowns are destined to fail, and they're trying to solve a problem that exists because people want to be able to enjoy a walkable experience to coffee shops and restaurants and boutiques, and it feels very artificial when it's not authentic and historic.
Yeah, I think and I don't know the commercial world, but like Westminster downtown is this new thing that they're really pushing, and it's being developed rather rapidly, just down the street from me. But new developments come at a premium, and I think commercial rent is really high. So anything that comes from that new artificial downtown is just going to be inherently expensive, and it makes it harder for new businesses or small businesses or people to just kind of live there.
Special taxing districts and high taxes are how those things are paid for. And somebody's got to pay for all that construction, so absolutely, Hamish. And you will see maybe more eclectic businesses in historic downtowns that have not blown up, right? Like you'll see more diversity of businesses in Lafayette's downtown than you will in Louisville's.
Big time.
And Boulder's downtown has turned into a parade of high-end boutique, outdoor clothing manufacturers and banks with coffee shops in them. So that's sort of disastrous, in my opinion, for the quality of a downtown. I think Lafayette's downtown is actually, it's only one strip. It's really fun. And Louisville's is much more than one strip. Louisville's downtown area is absolutely gorgeous. Yeah. And the clients we've encouraged to buy there have all uniformly reported back that it's an amazing experience, and they're really grateful. And they don't miss living. Some of these clients lived in Boulder. They don't miss living in Boulder. They actually like Louisville a lot more. So something to think about if you're evaluating moving here. Let's hit these other two really fast, Hamish, because we have, I think we can do 10 more minutes and push it, but that's really hard stop. Yep. Is your meeting a drive, or is your next meeting?
It's online. We're good.
Okay, great. Yep. So let's just do 10 more minutes. Colorado recently has come to my attention as ranking really horrific in crime rates, and that's something to think about, particularly as we are in election season. So there's a couple of links that we'll share with you on the podcast about the record crime rates in our state as they compare to other states. Like, we rank really poorly for crime rate, property crimes and other crimes as a state. And then we're also going to provide a link to the latest ballot measures, because in 2 weeks there's an election coming. And while we are going to refrain from... Yeah, in case you didn't know. We're going to refrain from commenting on the presidential election, but we will comment on Proposition 127. It's worth looking at, and I'll admit that I really detest how often these initiatives, these propositions, are written in a way to confuse. And I had to read this one 3 different times to make sure I was getting it. But it looks like it's a prohibition on trophy hunting, and of particularly big cats. So bobcats, lynx, and mountain lions. It totally makes sense, in my opinion, as a former biologist. You need healthy predators to maintain healthy populations of other animals. So, these bobcats, these mountain lions, these lynx, they're not really interacting with humans in horrific ways that often. Every year or 2 or 3, we see some sort of mountain lion interaction, usually with a little person, like a child, but it's super rare. And these populations help keep down the populations of rodents, keep other populations in check. Like, we are just inundated with chipmunks up here, and I'm so excited when I see a mountain lion or a fox in the garage camera. I'm like, woohoo! They're keeping those little chippies down before they nest in my truck. So that's what this looks like. It's a yes vote for us. I don't think we need more big cat hunting in Boulder County or anywhere in the state, and I think this is a state-level initiative. So, consider that one. And, of course, Hamish, I think you brought it to my attention. We absolutely need to mention another amendment. Hold on, where was it?
Can I, while you find it?
Yep.
The only person that I've talked to that disagrees, 2 people, one of them was concerned about, the deer population in Colorado as far as the trophy hunting thing goes, and then the other one was the safety aspect. And I look at it as you do, Osman, from a kind of biology and ecology standpoint. We're kind of just living in the world of nature, and nature kind of needs to be unchecked so that there can be a natural carrying capacity of the ecosystem. The populations and everything will level out, but we need to kind of get back to what we're not, less intervention with nature is kind of my thought and theory. But yeah, watch the little ones, watch your cats, watch your dogs, watch your pets. We live in the backyard of the Wild West kind of in Colorado. It's a fact of life. It's not something we can change by constantly hunting and changing the ecosystem around us. All right, Oz, take it away.
So the only other amendment I'm going to comment on is Amendment J. And this is Senate Concurrent Resolution 24003, repealing the definition of marriage in the Constitution, which in essence removes the ban on same-sex marriage. And I mean, so I grew up in upstate New York, where most of the people that I grew up with that turned out to be gay. They hid that in the closet. I discovered later as an adult that they were. And I will say that even in that rural community where I grew up that was relatively conservative, there wasn't much discussion or awareness on same-sex relationships. And if I can wake up and realize that this is, one, none of my business, and two, love is love, having grown up in this really conservative environment in upstate New York, then so can anybody else. And when people, have this sort of prohibition, it's usually from a place of ignorance. And so I'm 100% glad to support this amendment, and also all of our friends and family and business partners whose security in their relationships depend on this. And I will add one more, maybe arguably libertarian viewpoint. I really don't think the government should be in the marriage business at all. It should be in the civil union business. Marriage, and you could argue, and it's a reasonable argument, is a religious construct. But irrespective, if the government's going to be in the business of issuing licenses for this concept, and this concept is enshrined in so many different ways in our life, right? With property rights, with the right to have an opinion in someone's health care, with Texas, the right to person. With getting getting inheritances, with getting divorce resolutions and alimonies. Like, marriage is a legal concept inside of our how system. Our world is constructed. I don't think it should be, but it is. So that my opinion on how it shouldn't be is grandstanding. Given that it is 100%, we should be removing the ban. And so I don't know how I can get any more clear on that. And if I've offended somebody on my opinion that you feel like, oh, we'd rather not work with you as your realtor, well, then I honestly don't want your business. You're welcome to go to somebody that has a more conservative viewpoint. And I'm okay with others having a variety of viewpoints too. We don't need to agree on these things in life. I've got lots of clients who we're not aligned politically or whatever, right? It doesn't matter. My business is not to evaluate your particular perspectives on life. But if you know that we have this disagreement, maybe just don't bring it up so we don't have a conflict, because I'm more than happy to serve you otherwise. But if this is an issue for you in choosing us as a real estate agency, well, then it's an issue for me too. And I'd rather you choose somebody else that has more discriminatory views, in my opinion. We support our people. Yeah. We support love is love at House Einstein. So on that note, I think we can move off of the news.
We have speed to make. Yeah.
We'll skip the BERT. There's a thing about a Boulder to Erie trail. We'll leave the link. It's worth considering. I threw that in there late last night. It's worth researching and understanding whether it's ever going to happen, but it's a cool idea. We'll leave that for another time and just jump to carve-outs.
Yep.
So Hamish, you have 2 minutes. Tell me about zoom lenses and compression compositions.
Yeah.
And a new fad.
Being quick and keeping it up to, or within the 2 minutes, burning time as I speak. A lot of new phones these days have like 3 cameras on the back. You've got one which is your general kind of like wide, captures more in the screen, and I'm really kind of shrinking this down just so anybody can eat it. Osman is demoing, I'll demo too. What we're seeing more and more is zoom, and not. I kind of want to gloss over digital zoom and ignore that. Optical zoom, which is what you'd see with a camera with a really big lens on it. The more you zoom, it adjusts the way the picture looks, and it's kind of similar when you do it with your eyes if you look further away and closer up. But there's all sorts of different kind of compositions in cameras, and a picture that scratches that itch in your brain is largely likely due to the way that the image is constructed, where the subject sits in the frame and kind of what's surrounding the subject of the image and everything. I think with the addition and popularity and proliferation of zoom lenses, we're going to see a lot more kind of creative shots utilizing them, and we're also going to be able to day-to-day users are going to be able to get some cooler compositions just because of the compression factor that comes with those zoom lenses. When you zoom, you get a shallower depth of field. So when you think bokeh, we're rabbit holing, but bokeh is that kind of blur behind whatever you're focused on in your pictures. So like if you have portrait mode on your iPhone, that adds an artificial bokeh. When you have a zoom lens, by consequence, you get a shallower depth of field, you get more bokeh, but you also get compression. So the images in front of, behind, and in the middle of the image, when you're looking at it through a zoom, it flattens it out. The thing in the background is going to be larger in relation to the person in front. It just creates a lot of cool avenues. I think, again, just with how popular these zoom lenses and how prolific they are in day-to-day, I think we're going to see a lot of cool shots with them, and I think they're going to scratch a lot more of an itch. They're a newer thing. In the popular space, we've seen a ton of wide angle because that's all everybody's had in their pockets. But now that we're getting more, we're going to see more, and I think it's going to be kind of the next thing to come in. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
I agree with you completely, and I find those zoom images more dynamic and interesting, visually interesting. And so in terms of our content, our visual content, our video content, as long as we're not losing story, we should always be favoring dynamic and interesting images in still photography as well as our video. Vertical portrait video or horizontal long-form video, figuring out ways to do both dynamically interesting and good storytelling is the mission when it comes to marketing our listings and marketing our services, as well as explaining neighborhoods and property details and all those good things. So,
yeah, 100%.
Interest approved. Not that I have any say over your carve-outs. My carve-out has nothing to do with the lenses and photography. It's just now that I've finished up primary bike maintenance and things are on track, we're riding a lot more and exploring a lot of trails up here, and I'm adding a little e-juice to my rides because it keeps my heart rate down. And what I've realized, and all the racers that might be hearing this are going to say duh, but I'm not a professional athlete. What I've realized is that it's better to be training in a lower heart rate, say zone 2, than constantly being up at zone 4 and 5. And so building the base at zone 2 and 3 is really what you want to be doing. And so this juice, the e-juice, makes it way easier to not be spiking my heart rate while still getting a decent workout. So, and exploring a lot of fun single track and other adventures up here in the mountains right outside of Boulder is what I've been up to. And we are completely out of time, so it is time for our wrap up.
Brilliantly done. Dear listener, we kind of rushed to the end here on this one, but thank you so much for sticking it out with us. We hope we provided a lot of entertainment and perhaps even some insight. If you can't get enough, we have a newsletter where we talk about active listings as well as sold listings, and we just released October's version. Go ahead and check it out. It's in our website, houseeinstein.com, newsletter tab at the top. We also have a YouTube channel where we discuss all sorts of things, market conditions, neighborhoods, fresh listings that are ours, and even more. So check that out as well, House Einstein. Same with all of our other socials. It's all House Einstein. Thanks so much for joining us. We love the feedback, love the comments. Keep those coming, and have a fantastic week.
We'll see you next time.